Peter, you and I have been friends for years. I have even been honored to take your once yearly trip out to that special sushi bar you only go to once.
Yes.
Down there, it seems, where I get that once a year sushi bar. And so you've got this book. So I'm in a bit of a situation here, Pete. Okay.
All right.
You got a book. It's called How to Have Impossible Conversations.
Right.
I read it. I really like it.
Oh, thank you.
And it's a really good book on how to have conversations with people who are well, impossible. I've always had a very strong opinion that those untouchable subjects, religion and politics, that thing you never talk about, is exactly what you should be talking about.
Exactly. 100% agree.
Those Thanksgiving parties, and you sit quiet and you say, "Oh, we're not going to talk about religion and politics." Well, that's how echo tunnels happen. That's how wrong opinions happen, and you should be talking about that.
That's
so
right.
I want to talk a little bit about how to have impossible conversations, because it's a good book. It's an important book. It's just as good, if not better, than Manual for Creating Atheists, which I loved.
Thank you.
Which I own. However, it's not on the bookshelf behind me because I lent it to somebody. I think your book is so important that I lend it out.
That's good. That's good. That's the best reason to not have it on the bookshelf.
Right. So what is the reason that you don't have mine on your bookshelf again?
I do have yours on my bookshelf.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that, but then I want to talk about idea laundering. See, the problem that I'm having is your book is really good, and I want you to sell lots of copies of your book because it'll help the world if people read your book. But when I was at your house last, I was sitting on your couch petting your amazing dog.
We have another one since then, too, yeah.
Yes. And you said, "Oh, look, they're going to publish my paper." And you handed me your laptop and you said, "Here, this is going in the Wall Street Journal." And I read your article on idea laundering.
Right.
And I think it's a big idea, and I don't think it's gotten nearly enough play. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about impossible conversations, because it's important, but also I really want to talk about idea laundering and the insidiousness of it. So let's talk briefly about going to Thanksgiving. And I mean, let's try and modernize it. Okay, we're in a crisis, and people are facing death, and so let's talk about the people who are at home and their parents are sick and they're worried about their parents, but they're just fucking impossible.
Yeah.
Okay? Talk about the impossible conversation of coming back to a loved one, or a friend, even a loved one, who is so hard. You've had this blowout. Okay, let's say you've already had this blowout, and you want to make it go away, but they're impossible. They're impossible. So I know that impossible. I'm feeding you a low ball here, but I know you go into this impossible conversations about how you talk about diffusing the conversation and how you talk about, de-emphasizing the link between the person and the idea. Why don't you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay, so there was a lot there. So one of the most important things is in chapter 2 is you have to figure out what your goal is. So when you figure out your goal, you work back, and there's a lot of literature on that from the Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's a ton of that. Figure out what you want to do and then work backward. A guy, there's another thing real briefly before we go on. I think his name is Dave Ellis, if I remember correctly. He has this idea. It's a good little tool for people, especially younger people. Instead of thinking, where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? Where do I want to be in 20 years? Think to yourself, where do I want to be when I'm 70? What do I need to do to get there when I'm 60? Where do I want to be at 60? What do I need to do to get there at 50? In other words, you begin with the end in mind and you work backward. And so too it is with conversations. What is the relationship goal that you want to have? If you can answer that question, then maybe you just can't stand the person. Maybe you just want to avoid them. It all depends what your goal is. But once you clarify your goal, then you can work backward toward that goal.
So if you're at this proverbial Thanksgiving table,
and you just want to get along, that's most people's goals.
Well, is it the right thing to just want to get along? Let's say you want to engage.
That's way beyond the scope of the book. What one ought to do morally is not, with your in-laws. I can't answer that question. That's an extremely contextual, personal question. But how one should treat them, I think we can all agree that there are wrong answers to that question, right? Wrong answer number one: pull out a chainsaw. Right. I mean, there are wrong answers to that question. So the moment a question admits of wrong answers, that must mean that, or worse answers, that must mean there are better answers. So there are better answers to that question. Treating them with civility and decency is almost always, if not always, a good rule.
I had a Twitter experience just last night.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, you and I have Twitter experiences a lot, don't we? And so I don't even remember what the first thread was. I think it was something about Ben Shapiro.
Let me guess it. Let me just cut to the chase. It escalated in you being a Nazi, right? It just jumped to that. Is that right?
No, it almost did. So
okay.
I had the situation where I said something that would be inflammatory that was taken as, I said something normal, because I don't speak to inflame. I'm not a hateful person, but I said something normal and it was taken as extrapolated and hateful by an unnamed progressive person on the left. And what I did, and she tweeted and so I got this little onslaught of far lefties on my Twitter feed for a period of time. And every single one that said anything bad about me, I said, would you like to engage in a civil discourse about this? And, we can get on video and you can tell me why I'm wrong. You can tell me why I'm this way. And 100%, even one blogger, one Twitter person with 10,000 followers blocked me, muted me. All of them run. Why do wokeists run from conversation like that?
Yeah, that's baked into their ideology, and there are lines of literature about that. So that's very different from our traditional experience of engaging Christians, for example. If I put out a tweet tomorrow that I'd like to have a conversation or a debate, I don't think the debates are as productive as people think that they are. Are you drinking wine at 1 a.m., at 1 p.m.?
No, it's it's about 1 p.m. here. We're in a different time zone. It's 5 here.
Okay. Well, I'm drinking coffee. Anyway, I almost never day drink, even in a pandemic. Yeah, dude. All right. Anyway, yeah. So it's just baked into their worldview. And remember, the problem is it's not just that there's an epistemological flaw, or that is that there's a flaw in your method of reasoning or knowing. It's that you're a bad person. And so the consequence of that is, well, why would I talk to a Nazi? Why would I? And I know that you were raised Jewish, and I don't mean that offensively. Actually, I do mean it offensively, but I don't mean it personally offensively. But why would I talk to somebody who has an immoral, who has a moral problem? And so, it's not just baked into the ideology, it's baked into the culture, it's the worldview, it's the way to gain status in the community, it's a type of virtue signaling. And so all of these things are profoundly anti-liberal, they're profoundly anti-enlightenment, and they're the divergence of reality tunnels. And I've written about this before, and I've spoken about that on Peter Lindbergh's podcast, and I think it's a very important concept. But that doesn't mean that you can't be civil, and I will fully admit to you it's very difficult. One difference between you and I is that I have an organizational, at least at the moment, unless they go bankrupt, an organization with mechanisms of enforcement lording over me. So the folks can file anonymous complaints against me or named complaints against me, and it's just a theft of my time. I'm even hesitant to say that because I'll give people who wouldn't ordinarily think to do it. So with you, it just ends at Twitter, but with me, it just keeps going on. I just have to deal with these people constantly, and then I don't have to just deal with them. There, some of these people are my colleagues as well. So they've fallen into this deranged mindset. I was just thinking today, like one of the most, Jonathan Haidt in The Righteous Mind says, morality binds and blinds. And I think one of the most dangerous and most important things that people need to deal with is they need to develop an understanding that every single person, myself and yourself and everybody is susceptible to the moral mind overriding the rational mind. And the moment that happens, that's when a host of problems begin. I can talk about that if you want, but that's the basic idea.
Let's talk about impossible conversations with somebody who thinks you're a Nazi.
Okay, well, the first thing for an impossible conversation, if someone does not want, I'm a little distracted. I have no rooms in my house. My kid's home from college, and my dog, my new puppy, has gotten a hold of, I don't even know what she's eating. I normally run and get her, but I tried to get it out of her mouth before, but she's too fast. Anyway, and I'm not, she's not well.
When the virus is over.
She's not well trained enough. Say again?
When the virus is over, I'm coming back to meet the new puppy.
Good. She'll probably jump on me at some point in this interview. So I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought. Say that again about impossible conversations. What was it?
So relate impossible conversations to a person.
Oh, the woke. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. We've got this wokeism situation. I'm very passionate about wokeism, and these people will not discuss.
Yeah. Okay. So let me give you a little brief primer on this. So James Damore, I invited James Damore, the infamous Google memo guy, to speak with actually Andy Ngo is the president of the Free Thinkers Society. We invited the Women's Studies Department at Portland State University. They didn't come. It would have been just the two of us and the Women's Studies Department for a conversation. These folks, they don't want conversation. They just don't want it. And I was framed it as, I think it was a spirited conversation rather than a debate. The first thing I said, and people are more than welcome to view that video, is James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and I, this is before the Grievance Studies affair, are speaking, I think, in that was the 17th, I think it was the 19th, February 19th of last year or 2 years ago. Nobody came, of course. And then the Mythicist Milwaukee guys wanted to have a debate. This was an actual debate between Clay Rutledge, James Lindsay, myself, and anyone. I feel a sneeze coming on. Anyone. Excuse me. And thank
God bless you, Pete.
I was just going to say thank you for not. Only you could get away with that. Okay. So they couldn't find anybody to debate with a purse. And the only thing is that people had to have, you have to be very mindful of quote unquote punching down, like, oh, you're teaching college and you have a PhD and why. Okay. So like they called, I think they spent 80 hours emailing, calling, etc. They couldn't find anybody. Over and over again. I'm just doing an impossible conversations now with, I think it's Karma Productions, Travis, Become the Signal at hotmail.com of his email address. And we're putting out this impossible conversations. I put out a single tweet, who wants to have a conversation, who thinks equity, diversity, and inclusion are not cracked up to be what people think they are and would like to test your arguments. Flood of emails. Who would like to defend equity? Nobody. There is something that is baked into this ideology that the very values and principles, the core tenets, are antithetical to discourse and conversation, because those are Enlightenment values, right? Those are okay. So the other thing is it's seated in the idea that we can use reason to live better lives. Now, this really needs to be unpacked because we have to talk about postmodernism, meta narratives. I'd love to talk about that. We can do that, but the key is that if somebody is not willing to speak to you, it's not just like you kidnap them and throw them in the trunk of your car until they'll speak to you, right? There is no, if you're trying to talk to somebody and they literally punch you in the face or walk away, that's not an impossible conversation. That's not a conversation at all. An impossible conversation is when the divides are so deep, a word that's thrown around, but often not accurately, is incommensurable. Like when people get divorced, they cite incommensurable differences. The divide is so great you just think it's impossible. But the key is they have to be willing to say something to you, right? I mean, when I taught in prisons, I know I'm giving a lot of information, but the fear was not, I wrote about this in the book, the fear was not that someone would not talk to me, the fear was not that someone would say, fuck you or give a bad argument, but the fear was that someone would not talk to me. Because if someone won't talk to you, there's no way to hook on to their cognitions, right? There's no way to access that. So that's a long answer, but that's the basic idea.
Okay, so let's take the one less step then. Let's take one less extreme step. They say, I think you're a bad guy, but I'm willing to listen. I think you're wrong, Mr. Liberal,
I almost never hear that, but okay.
Yeah, well, so yeah, we never do hear that. So what do we do, Pete?
Well, if someone doesn't want to have a conversation with you, there's literally nothing you can do. What are you going to do if someone doesn't want to talk to you? There's nothing you can do. It's even worse when not only do they not want to talk to you, I honestly at this point I can sincerely tell you that I believe that this culture, they have created a culture that's almost perfectly antithetical to human flourishing.
Yeah, it's very like Dawkinsian style mind virus.
Yeah. It is totally. Yeah, totally.
It's very memeish. The way it adapts, the way it says, okay, well, you can't question me because I'm a victim, and all whites are racist, like, all non-whites are not racist.
Yeah, and if you say something, if you have an argument, if you make an argument in philosophy, you use the word argument to kind of present the reasons for a conclusion that one holds, as opposed to the traditional vitriol argument. There are so many things so many responses, if they choose to give a response. Reason is a Western white male narrative. The whole Kate man down girl, you're just doing this to oppress women. Yeah, I mean, it really is it's an astonishing belief system that almost perfectly insulates itself from not only any form of criticism, but it obliterates the possibility of belief revision. I mean, I genuinely believe it's one of the greatest toxins of our age. Lindsay, I was talking to him about this the other day. He believes that in many ways that this is the mirror image of certain aspects of Trumpism. That I have a disagreement about that. I think he's another kind of deranged maniac, but and the ideology that buys into that and is perpetuated through systems. And one more thing, I'll take another step back. That's why I think we're in the middle right now of what Jürgen Habermas, the philosopher, calls a legitimation crisis, a legitimacy crisis. We have a crisis in our institutions. We have a crisis in higher ed. We have look at the Southern Poverty Law Center, look at the WHO, look at our academies, look at the judiciary, look at the Congress, the Senate, the executive branch. There's a wide scale crisis of legitimacy. And so the question is, my answer to this, I'll give you what I think the question is: how do we regain public trust in our institutions, especially when they're staffed by ideologues? I don't know if you saw a tweet that Andy No put out about this woman claiming that all Trump survived. All Trump is, you saw that? Yeah, they want to kill blacks. And I mean, people are totally deranged. I think Trump's a fucking lunatic, but every time you hear claims like that, it makes it more difficult to separate legitimate criticisms, of which there are so many on an hourly basis that you can't even. But when you hear this rhetoric and nonsense coming out from tenured professors,
the black community,
who look at the classroom as an ideology mill to indoctrinate people, and then that erodes the public trust of conservatives in the institutions, we have a serious problem on our hands, right? And so the way to get back to that, my solution to that is we need to give people the tools and to have those conversations, particularly when we're up against ideologies like Judith Butler's, paradigmatic disruption and the idea that it's a virtue not to speak to somebody. So we need to give the tools to empower people to do so, and that was one of the impetuses of the book.
And that's such a powerful point. We have to make it cool to discuss. We have to make skepticism mandatory again. We can't make it. We can't keep it to be prideful, to be blindly ignorant. Okay.
Yeah.
We can't brag about acting like the religious zealots that we decry. Okay.
Yeah. So here's the key to that. I think the key is to recognize that this is not merely a principle. This is not merely an ideological current or something that's ideologically fashionable among less intelligent people. Let me give you a quick personal example. So the reason I haven't gone up for promotion in a while is because I always thought I'd be fired. Anyway, so I get this email from my boss. I've been waiting to be fired forever. You're up for promotion. And you have to get external letter writers. So the first thing I do is, okay, I'll get, some public intellectuals. No, they have to be from philosophy departments. Okay. So I have gone after so many sacred cows at this point. I have no idea who will write me a public letter. that is who will put their name in a letter. Philosophers will come up to me and thank me, but they won't do it publicly. I've gone after faith. I've gone after alternative medicine. I've gone after intersectionality. People are cool when you go after another view, but when you go after something in which they're in that orbit, or they have these ideological predilections or sympathies, then you've all of a sudden crossed the line.
Well, yeah, you're exposing them to cancel culture. If they don't have tenure, they could be fired just for endorsing you.
Yeah, they could certainly receive a lot of heat for it, for sure.
Yeah.
So, and they won't. So it's a very interesting. It's just very interesting that a lot of that, as I'm realizing, is a function of university architecture, but just the way that we use promotion and tenure packets and who are allowed to ask and not. But what's interesting to me is that these phenomenon, they're not just like ex nihilo. They don't just pop out of nothing. It's not like manna from heaven that just keeps raining down. It's that they start in the academies, and we know the nucleation point. And again, that Andy No tweet was great. And I think I tweeted out, my quote tweet was, "She's tenured," right? They start in the universities, and it bleeds out, and we see this, and they have their own lingo, they have their own language, they have their own chants, all of that makes conversation almost impossible, right? So you're already talking about a conversation about things that are difficult if they have identity level salience, or if the issues have a moral valence to them. You put it in hard mode when you're talking not only across an ideological, intellectual, epistemological, political, moral gulf or divide or what have you, but when people think they're better people for not talking to you in the first place.
Right. They're committing a sin. The opposite is they're committing a sin when they do talk to you.
Yeah.
So it's not just that they're being good when they don't talk to you. They're committing a sin when they do.
Yeah, they're losing status.
Caught, they will get the penalties for committing those sins is huge.
Yeah, they're losing status in their community, and I don't know if there's a game. Can you hear the dogs in the background? Sorry.
Yeah, but I like dogs.
Sorry. I don't know if there's a kind of a game theory calculus in this, but I think part of it is, when you're in a presidential race and you're winning in the polls, you want to have as few debates, maybe none, as possible. But if you're losing, you want them. These people are winning. They're winning the ideological war. They're winning the culture war. It's in tech. It's in media. It's certainly dominating the academy.
Okay, so let's segue then into this article that I really want to talk about. This and the concept is idea laundering. And when I read this sitting on your couch, I handed it back to you, and I'm like, wow. And it's been in my brain, and nobody's talking about it, but it's festering in my brain, and it's really salient, and I really want you to talk about it. So tell me about idea laundering and how it is manifested and how it has worked into wokeism.
All right. So that's Brett Weinstein's term. It's not my term.
Right.
When I explained it to him, that was the term he said. And I was like, it was a huge light bulb when he used that. So let's talk about what money laundering is first, and then we'll say, I can't believe you're drinking at 1:21.
I'm in the West Coast. It's 5:30 here.
That's good. Wow, it must be in a different West Coast. So when you money launder, you have dirty money, illegally ascertained money. You wash it, you put it in through some ostensibly legitimate legal process, and it comes out as, seemingly legit. That you can. I have to go for a second. My puppy has gotten into something else. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
In idea laundering. So you have an idea, and I have an idea. And maybe we have another buddy who has an idea. Maybe. I'm trying to think of who else we had dinner. We had dinner with the Rick the lawyer. We all have ideas. I'm an academic, so I say, listen, I want to start a journal, and I get some people who have like minds around me. Whatever I want to, I have some moral impulse. I have something I know is true morally, and ultimately what I'll end up doing is discharging that moral impulse in an academic journal. So I find a bunch of people who are other academics, and I say, listen, I'm starting this journal like Fat Studies, is an actual journal. I'm starting Charlotte Cooper's journal out of England. I get a bunch of people who have the same moral impulses. They write articles. It is identical to a regular journal, literally identical in every way. It has an editorial board. It finds its way into libraries. Excuse me. And so it goes in as an idea, as a moral impulse. It goes in, boom. It's laundered in the journal, and it comes out as knowledge. So then, when you ask someone, "Well, how do you know something?" They point to the article in a journal. So they'll just literally point to it, and they'll say, "This is exactly how I know this person, this article, this date, right here." So unlike Christians who, as you know better than anyone, when you talk to them for a long time, the overwhelming majority of Christians, when I say a long time, when you have an extensive, intense conversation with them, almost always the conversation will come down to faith. Excuse me. So their epistemology, their way of knowing is faith, and they have many ways of, validating that internal to testimony of the Holy Spirit or what have you. These people, they don't need any faith because they've laundered all their ideas. They just point to they just point to the articles in these peer-reviewed journals, and then that goes on to make university policy and become institutionalized, to basically indoctrinate people, to inform public policy. So it starts with idea laundering.
So the idea is that these journals that aren't really journals. So tell me about the difference between these journals and other journals.
Oh no, they are journals. That's the genius of this whole thing, is that they are actual journals. So, but they're journals. Okay, so they're journals indistinguishable from other journals. They're either digital or on paper. I mean, you can see these. We targeted them. Like Hypatia is the leading feminist philosophy journal, and we got a wonderful piece accepted by Hypatia that played on their moral sensibilities. I think the one that's just the easiest one to understand for people with who've never even heard of a peer-reviewed journal. Peer-reviewed journals, they're not like editorials or op-eds or what have you. They're when experts in your field look at the ideas and say, this is good, this is a contribution to knowledge. This is and that's what makes them scholarly. And so then libraries buy these journals, and then the journals okay, so let's even take a step back from that. So there are many, many peer-reviewed journals, and not all peer-reviewed journals are the same. Some peer-reviewed journals, they're different by discipline. So, for example, there's journals in civil engineering, there are journals in anthropology, psychology, philosophy, etc. The problem is that these journals are indistinguishable from other journals. That's what makes these ideas so easy to launder, is because you can't tell the difference.
So this, and in your article, you talk about how this is what feeds the liberal arts college, and that these journals feed people who are now teachers.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so talk about how we're in a second generation. So relate this back to wokeism and all that stuff. So this whole thing can be put into a picture.
Yeah, so you're right. There are a ton of moving parts. One thing you mentioned is the teachers. So Lyle Asher has written some great stuff from Lewis and Clark. He's in the English department, about how pre-service teachers of college education, the programs in colleges that teach teachers assign these materials. The reason they assign these, again, this is so many moving parts, and this is so complicated. Let's take just one piece of this and we'll break it down. So in the 1950s, people like people who are like themselves. That's just a general rule. In the 1950s, it was white, ostensibly heterosexual men who held certain ideologies. Now it's people. Now there are new hiring promotion requirements, diversity, for example. But diversity doesn't mean what people think it means. It means ideological homogeneity, particularly those who buy into intersectionality. So what happens is sorry, pandemic life. Shit's falling all over my backyard here. Jesus, the distractions are intense. All right. So what happens is that, God, I got dog eating a bird. I got my next door neighbors. I don't know what on earth they're doing. Sorry if you hear that construction noise. I can't even. What was I talking about? Sorry, Dave. Edit that part out again.
It's okay. We were talking about how this relates to wokeism.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So College of Teacher Education. So faculty get promoted and tenured based upon, one of the things is their peer-reviewed articles, their scholarship profile. And so, like what I'm doing now is in my package, you have to put in the articles that you've published, etc. But this whole thing is a racket. All these ideas have been idea laundered. Dawkins calls these folks pretentious charlatans. They've taken ideas that are morally fashionable that other people in this fringe minority agree with, and they're using that to self-credential. So it's a self-credentialing mechanism, and 7 articles in 7 years, they get tenure. So once they get tenure, all along the way, they're teaching articles. They're using these articles in their classroom to teach to their students. Their students then go out into the workforce in about 5 to 7 years and take a lot of these ideas when they become leaders and managers, etc. So those articles then, among the places they wind up, are in pre-service college teacher education programs. So all of the teachers get only one side, and most of it comes from a variation of Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He was a Brazilian educator. And so it's the idea that you want to teach to remediate oppression. Like, that's the primary goal of the educator. It's grossly oversimplified, but that's the basic idea. So now what happens is this becomes the dominant educational ideology. It's the moral orthodoxy. It's found in colleges of education. It's found in, that's what they use. That's how they've infected high schools, elementary schools, junior high schools, and colleges. It's through the mechanism of idea laundering. And that in and of itself is woke. These texts don't teach the other side of the issues. They don't teach the other side, for example, of gentrification. They have very strict ideas about what is true and what is not true and what students should learn. And the mechanism for the distribution of those ideas is idea laundering.
And what's the cure? I mean, this is one of the things that I've been thinking about. I mean, ever since I read that article, I'm like, well, what do we do about this? We've got teachers in college, professors in college who were brought up in laundered ideas.
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what the cure is. Exactly what the cure is. And this is what I was going to do, as you know, but it didn't work out. The cure is that somebody needs to, and I would be very surprised if someone hadn't started this already. Somebody needs to write a book that will serve as a definitive guide. This is part of the cure, part of it, for teachers in pre-service teacher education programs, as an alternative to the pedagogy of the oppressed. And that book should harken back to, which is what I was going to do in my book, ancient values, Socratic values, truth, basic epistemology. And it should write very clearly in a way that makes people value figuring out, placing your epistemology front and center and teaching people how to do that regardless of ideological considerations. In other words, it would be a teaching through social justice. Social justice is just, we're so myopic we can't see it. It's just an ideology like any other ideology. But right. It's just that we happen to have it at this time, and so our moral minds latch onto it and think it's objectively true. It's not objectively true. It's total nonsense. In fact, not only is it not objectively true,
it's total nonsense.
False.
But it's total nonsense, backed up by decades of paper that has been laundered and looks like it's peer-reviewed.
Yeah, and
how do we, in a big picture, how do we get this message across? How do we look at wokeism when they say things like, the patriarchy is this and the wokeism and racism is that?
Here's what you do. You ready? This problem, because of the coronavirus, I was trying not to say that, but COVID-19, this problem is going to solve itself far more quickly than we think. I know solve is maybe not the right word, but so here's what's going to happen. Here's my prediction for what's going to happen. I've predicted this for a long time now. First and second tier universities are going to be fine. They're going to still keep cranking out this nonsense, unabated, get tenure, self-credential, cull conservative, moderate, liberal voices from the university. It's going to keep going on. There's no question about it. However, third and fourth tier universities are already in trouble financially. I do not think they should be bailed out. I do not think they should be subsidized. I think that they should just fail. I think that we should let them fail. And the worst thing you can do is a plan like Elizabeth Warren's, who fortunately, hopefully she won't be Biden's VP, which would be an utter catastrophe if he bows to the far left intersectionalist. We cannot fund people's student loan debt. We just can't do it, because that would incentivize these, or let me put it this way, that would disincentivize these disciplines from tethering their ideological presuppositions to reality. So we can't do it. We can't have any of it. So it's going to take a blow. Huh?
We don't want people getting an education because the danger of them becoming wokeist is too great.
It's not an education. Education comes from Latin educare. It's like, to lead out of, like Plato's book 7 of Plato's Republic, when he's talking about the allegory of the cave. You're leading somebody out of something, a state of ignorance. You're not putting stuff in. That's the ancient conception of knowledge. You're not like putting in that there's grievances everywhere, putting in that everybody is a racist, like Ta-Nehisi Coates and such. You're not putting in ideas that are not evidence-based. You're leading people you're helping them challenge questions and assumptions about reality and their beliefs, etc.
Well, I mean, you're a college professor. You're a PhD, a college professor, and you're actually saying that it would be better for us. I mean, that just sounds so counter.
Okay, think about it this way. This is a much easier concept to grasp. Let's say that I had a technique in martial arts, and I call it the pinky technique. Tick, 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 tick. And you do this. You do this every time you do this, and you practice this. You develop katas around this, and you find opponents, non-resisting opponents. There's no aliveness, as Matt Thornton says. And you do this, and you get really good at it, and you develop a skill in it. As Dan Dennett says famously in a wonderful little article that I'd urge everybody to read about CHMES, CHMESS. If it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing well. If it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing well. That's one component of this. The second component of this is it's even worse, because if you do this well and then you get in a fight, you're going to get your ass kicked. It's like those fighting styles that teach people to keep their hands down. But the point in all of this is it would be better if those people didn't learn anything at all. It's better to not learn this. If you didn't learn this, you'd be better off than if you learned nothing at all. It'd be better off to learn nothing than to learn that, right?
Better to go to a trade school than to go to a liberal arts college?
Well, no, it's more nuanced and more complicated than that. It's better to not learn bad ideas and study them and think that it's true than to learn bad ideas and study them and think they're true. So it's better to not learn bad ideas at all and think they're true than it is to not learn those ideas. Let's see, did I frame that right? Yeah, it's better if we didn't learn bad ideas, right? Mm-hmm. We're teaching people bad ideas. We're teaching people things that are harmful, hurtful, that separate us as people, that are not evidence-based, that are conspicuously ideological, and it's informing public policy and killing us, and would be better off if we didn't teach people those things at all, right? In the same way that we would be better off if nobody learned the pinky technique and got really, really good at it.
See where I brought the wine in?
You need it. We need it.
But so what you're saying is we've lost education.
We've lost education for 25 years now, at least 20 years. Yeah, it's gone. It's Helen Pluckrose has a great article on Aereo magazine, How French Intellectuals Ruin the West. It's a wonderful little article. Can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah.
So it's better off if we stop. So look, these disciplines are incapable of self-reform. They're just not capable of it. So it's better off if we let the whole thing fail. I mean, I was also against, in full disclosure, Bush's bailout in 2008 of the banks, because now it's less predictive. The mechanisms are less predictive for the economy and the road ahead. And it's also, just parenthetically, why I supported Andrew Yang, because I do believe I am liberal, maybe classically liberal would be the way to say it. And I do believe that in a universal basic income, and I do believe in a steep graduated income tax, and I do believe, I think those principles are rationally derivable. That's very, very different, those economic principles. And Eric London he's a worldwide socialist, he's basically a bona fide Marxist, came out in support of this stuff. So it's not just a question of being on the right or on the left. It's a question of parasitic value, like you said, like a meme that's infected contemporary leftism. I actually wrote about that in my first book a little bit.
I mean, I understand, and I frankly, I do agree with the idea of universal basic income. I believe that we're going to, I mean, even without the virus, we're going to have so many homeless people, so many unemployed people,
right?
Population growth and the decrease in jobs.
And what do you think my colleagues are going to do when they lose their jobs? These people, I mean, what do you think they're going to do? I mean, rather than be predictive, let's find out. I don't think that they're capable of surviving in the real world.
So what's going to happen, Pete? Wokeism is being fueled by people who think they learned it in college, so it must be true. That's the source of.
It's also right,
because that's why I think Ideal Laundering really rung for me, because one of the things that really got me going when I was an atheist activist was that I knew I was right. Okay, right. And I knew I was right because I read it and I thought about it, but these people know they're right because they learned it in college, and you don't learn wrong things in college. And so now we've got this army of people who are really angry because the fact of the patriarchy and the fact of institutional racism and the fact of oppression is drilled into their heads.
Yeah, and it's more recalcitrant.
That's what we do.
It's more recalcitrant, and then they keep pointing to the articles, or I learned it in college, or everybody knows it. It's taught in all colleges. So we let the colleges fail. Good riddance to them too.
What about society?
Well, that's the problem with that. The problem is the universities are gems of knowledge production. I was, before the Grievance Studies project, I was a big fan of colleges of education, and I was Pollyanna in that I thought that they could be reformed and retethered to reality. I no longer believe that, and I think that they're best. It's best if we just let the market deal with it. And I'm not saying that from out of any libertarian impulse at all. The problem is that you'll still have professors in especially because of diversity initiatives like that Andy No tweet. You'll still have professors in first and second tier universities cracking out complete bullshit too. I mean, this is not complicated. This is the most basic thing possible. Formulate your beliefs on the basis of evidence. And for some reason, you and I have been saying that for years, and it's not controversial unless you apply it to a sacred cow. The moment you apply it to something like faith or intersectionality or alternative medicine or whatever sacred cow you go after, that's when people lose their shit. But, people are like, formulate your beliefs on the basis of evidence. So we have a tremendous problem now, and but here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make another prediction, if I may. When third and fourth tier universities start to break down, they're going to blame it on the patriarchy. They're going to blame it on white people. They're going to blame it on some, heterosexuals. They're going to blame it on anything other than the fact that they were giving out degrees. There's a reason, anything other than the variables that they should blame it on. They're going to always go back to the mantras of racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. And they're right. There's a kernel of truth in all this stuff. There is racism. There is sexism. There is homophobia. And we absolutely have to fight those things. There's no sane person would say that's not true. No sane person. But the problem is that has overridden traditional structures of looking at evidence in their minds. And I wrote about this in the Philosopher's piece, Diluted Departments. That's Michael Shermer's insight. The single greatest insight in all of critical thinking is that smarter people are better at rationalizing bad ideas. In other words, they're better at coming up with good reasons for bad conclusions or for unjustified conclusions. Groups of smart people are better at that still. It has a magnifying effect. That's the situation in which we find ourselves now. And I don't no longer believe the universities are salvageable.
You no longer believe, as a college professor, that the universities are salvageable.
Yeah, independent of my teaching in college. No, I don't think they're salvageable. No, I think that they have fallen to ideology. But people will come back and they'll say, well, they're always, I was just thinking of the Alistair McIntyre's History of Western Intellectual Thought. Every value. Every age has been dominated by a value, and then the universities have picked that up, and every people in every age have thought, oh my God, this is the end of the world, this value. I think the stakes are really high now, Dave. I don't think we can afford to fuck around anymore. So I think we need to let the universities fail.
But Pete, how do we know if the peer-reviewed journals are corrupted and the colleges are corrupted? How do we know what's true?
Well, that's exactly why we did this. That's exactly why we did the Grievance Studies Project, because we need to have Trump is screaming, you know, dude, there are pictures, literally pictures of his rally, of how many people are there. And he's calling it fake news. I mean, multiple independent sources have taken pictures of how many people were at his rally, and the fucking guy's calling him. He's insane. So we could take one of these blows to the legitimacy of our institutions. But now it's too pervasive. We need to have something that we can rely upon, something that we can say, aha, I know this. This is how the best minds have tried to falsify it, not the other way around. A group of fringe lunatics has tried to make a moral impulse to justify it and then launder it as knowledge. And that is exactly the situation. And then we reward them socially. Everybody has a kind of social and intellectual deference to things. And when you call it out, you're a bad person. You know, every time I call this shit out, people go crazy.
I think that's the key that you just went into. Because when my idea of skepticism, old style skepticism, is try and prove yourself wrong and fail. Right. You try and prove yourself wrong and fail. When I wrote Fighting God, I wrote that piece about Judaism being a nationality, and what I wrote that is I tried to write the supporting pieces, and I failed.
Right.
Okay. And so as I'm looking at this, the difference between a real peer-reviewed journal and a fake peer-reviewed journal is that the peers try to disprove it and fail in the real peer-reviewed journal, and they try to boost it up in the fake journal. That's the difference. It's the quality of the peers.
Yeah, well, not just the quality of the peers, but they start with their conclusions first. That's what all of our papers did. You start with your conclusions first, and then you try to make them true. And the peer reviews, and instead of saying, they just say, "Wow, this is great. I love this. Now you're a journal. Now it's a peer-reviewed journal. Now it's true." Okay, so instead of saying, wow, like there's a problem here. See, they can't do that because their moral mind's overridden their rational mind. So they're literally incapable of that. So instead of doing that, they attack the people who point it out, like me, right? Or they bring me up on charges or whatever. So it'd be like someone trying to bring a bomb through an through an airport metal detector, and then going over to the head of the TSA and say, look, man, we just brought this bomb through there. This is serious shit. You need to fix this right away because some fucking nutcase is going to get on the plane with a bomb, right? And instead of the person saying, holy shit, this is awesome. Thank you so much. We've got to fix this. This is a huge problem. Let's attack the guy who brought the bomb on. Right. You didn't use your real name when you tried to sneak a bomb on the plane. You tried to distract, whatever it is. You made the people feel bad. They were human subjects who tried to, instead of justifying how we let a bomb get through. That's the situation in which we find ourselves. So I'm over it. I'm done. That's it. I have no use for this anymore. And let them fail. They will fail. Enrollment will continue to decrease. The only way they're not going to fail is if they're bailed out. And I don't think we should bail them out. I think they need to fail. And I think these people need to find meaningful employment. And there's a lot of honor in being a carpenter or a plumber. I don't think they could do that. I can't do that myself. I mean, I don't think they can do that. It's just like in jiu-jitsu, it's like one of the things that you realize is that I think that in this worldview, Dave, it embodies a kind of justification for one's own failure. It's a perfect way to slip in, if you feel that your accomplishments haven't been justified in life. Now you have an ideology you can plug into and blame it on some, the patriarchy. You can blame it anything else. Here's the problem though. The problem is that there are economic disparities that affect people, and those need to be in just equality of opportunity. We do have failing schools, and that's a disgrace, particularly in this country. And what they do is they try to ride on the coattails of the civil rights movement. I know this is a very complicated thing, and there's a lot of ideas there, but I think we need to let these universities fail. And I started to talk about jiu-jitsu. There's something in the idea, the process of getting good, where you have to tap out, like I've had enough. I don't think I think it's difficult in general, and there are exceptions to this. There are jiu-jitsu gyms a lot of Antifa people started going to fairly recently, but I think that there's something in that process of tapping out, of deferring to reality, that acts as a corrective mechanism for one's cognitions and how one weaves one's way through life, how one navigates life's complexities. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. I got a lot on my mind.
It's all right. It's all right. We're coming up on the hour. Is there anything else that you'd like to say on these subjects? I mean, this is something that I really wanted to have this conversation, and I really appreciate you being on. But I think this is a really important topic for people to understand. I guess the word is just how fucked we are. And
yeah, so you're right, and not only because Trump is a lunatic, and not only because people are not looking. I mean, look at the pandemic. Everybody looks through things through their own moral and ideological lens, right? So the trick for all of us is to try to figure out if the moral and ideological lens we're using to view reality is the one that we ought to use. And as you said before, when you wrote Fighting God, the section on Judaism, one of the things you tried to do is disprove it. So it's falsifiability. Try to falsify your beliefs. The problem is that the push of your whole mind is for you to not accept as true the beliefs that you falsify.
Again?
We don't want to. We're already predisposed. It's like, why, if somebody is a Christian and they're trying to falsify their beliefs, or someone has a strong moral view about something, any other view like Islam or atheism, etc., that they're trying to look at and see if it's true and see if their own views are false, they're looking at it through that lens. It's like you have spectacles, you have Christian spectacles on your face, and you're trying to figure out if Christian, some proposition about talking snakes or whatever, it's true. It always goes back through the spectacles. So the very way that you're interpreting the issue is through the moral lens that that's affixed to your eyes in the first place. So that's a problem. That's one of the reasons you have to hold belief revision as a value.
Yeah.
I think it's a terrible situation. I think we have a crisis of legitimacy in our institutions, and I've personally given up on it. I really don't give a shit about it either way. I honestly couldn't possibly care less about it because I have no hope whatsoever. The only reason you'd care about it is you think it has some possibility of redemption or self-correction. I don't. I've completely given up on that. It's utterly
on what?
It's completely ideological and conceptually bankrupt. And that's my opinion. I mean, maybe you'll have.
You want here from your opinion? You're a PhD. You're a college professor. You're the first.
Dude, that doesn't mean shit. I'm telling you.
I also think you're a pretty prophetic guy. I think you're a very smart guy. I think you're pretty prophetic.
That may or may not be true, but I don't think you should defer to me because of my credentials. I mean, I got a lot of people who despise me and totally disagree. My question would be for them on what evidence. My first question would be, do they have pronouns in their bios? I told the guy on my committee, I don't want, I don't trust anybody who puts pronouns in their bio, because I don't think it's a question of this is my gender identification. I think it's a political and social statement. It's a way to virtue signal in your community and gain status. So I don't think that these decisions are being made. I think that idea laundering is a problem. I think that the college system is incapable of self-reform, especially since we have so many people now who subscribe to intersectional ideology, are unwilling to debate. And I'm not even a big fan of debate. They're unwilling to have conversations. I talked to one of the people at my university, without going into specifics, who's in charge of a diversity program. I asked this individual to have a conversation with me about diversity, and I told him that this is way before the grievance season. I don't understand this. I'll buy you lunch. Explain this to me, because I have so many questions and so many issues that seem crying out for an answer. And this is literally this person's job to answer these questions. And instead of answering my questions, he reported me to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So that's the situation in which we find ourselves. Now, admittedly, Portland State is far worse than other institutions, or better. I mean, if you like this stuff, then the place is great. Well, no, yeah. Well, no, I mean, again, the Evergreen is great if you like this stuff. So I shouldn't say worse. I mean, it just depends on your perspective. My perspective is different.
Well, worse on the perspective of a college teaching actual things, teaching actual facts.
Yeah,
Teaching
but
truth.
these folks, they think it isn't. They think intersectionality is an actual thing because they think that their whole purpose of education is, again, is to remediate these injustices which they think are pervasive and systemic. So
So it's giving them an excuse to fail.
well, you know what I'd love to do.
You should
You know what? One of the things, I don't know when you're going to release this, but you know, when I put that tweet out about defend if you think it's diversity, equity, inclusion, or conceptually bankrupt, test your arguments. What I didn't put out is I'm going to be the one they're testing their arguments against. The problem is I don't actually believe this shit. I don't actually believe anything I'm going to say, but I need to figure out. And the problem with that is I would love to have somebody with whom I can have a conversation about this stuff. And now people are going to see this, and all of my harassers are going to come out. I don't have. Let me be crystal clear. I will not have a conversation with people who have harassed me. I've just done an impossible conversation. I did literally at 1:00 every day. I've done an impossible conversation. I think like 5 weeks now, something like that. I don't know how many weeks. All the days are blending together. I put a booth up, and it's all the same thing. I mean, people just manufacture criticism when they don't actually have any criticism. Instead of saying, okay, let's take a sincere look at this ideology. That's also why I think debates are bullshit. Why not just have a conversation about something? What do you need a debate for?
Well, because nobody will have conversations, and you're hoping that debate people.
That's the problem. Yeah, I was going to do an event before it got canceled with Paul Vanderklay, the pastor, and I think I profoundly disagree with him, but I think he's a very sincere guy. He's a Calvinist, and I have no problem going on stage and having a conversation, but I'm not going to have a conversation with somebody who, or even attempt to, if, you know, I turn on the screen here in this pandemic and people are like, fuck you, Nazi. Like, that's not a conversation. That's you screaming at me that I'm a Nazi.
Right. But that's them believing they're doing good because of all the information they've received. They learned it in college.
Yes.
It's got to be true.
Yes.
And those peer-reviewed articles are backing them up.
Yes. Correct. Absolutely correct. So now you see the magnitude of the problem.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get across.
And that's why it's so easy to view people like me as a villain. Because all of your culture, your society, everybody you know is talking about this. It's in the media. I mean, the media is woke. It's in tech. It's in Google's algorithm. It's in YouTube's algorithm. It's wired in. It's baked into our technology at this point. It's baked into the structure of certain social institutions. So then when you see somebody, maybe it's too conspicuous to say being a gadfly or you know, when you see someone calling this shit out, it's extremely easy to vilify them as a horrible person, not just because they're wrong, but because there must be a moral shortcoming in them. There has to be something moral, because how could it possibly be that everything I've learned in college is 4 years that these people are all delusional? It couldn't possibly not. In fact, it's precisely because there are so many smart people who buy into it that it makes it more likely that it's delusional. And that's my deluded departments piece in the Philosopher's Magazine.
Dr. Peter Boghossian, my friend of many years. Your book is called How to Have Impossible Conversations. It's a good book. I really appreciate you writing it. And Pete, you know, our conversations always interest me, and I'm glad we were able to do this. I really appreciate you coming on and bringing.
I talked a little too much, Dave. I had a lot of shit on my mind, and I'm highly caffeinated and exhausted, so I didn't sleep.
But I think I really wanted people to get this picture that you painted, and so I thank you for coming on and doing this with me.
I appreciate that, and thanks for, you know, we've had disagreements, but we've never had a harsh word between ourselves. But we've had disagreements, and that's what friends should do. They should be free to say, "Hey, yeah, I mean, you think this, and I think this. Yeah, I think this is bullshit, and you think this is, and you call me, and I listen, and you listen, and that's another principle in how to have let friends be wrong.
Friends do.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's not, oh, this person doesn't believe exactly what I believe, so therefore he's a fucking Nazi. No. I mean, can you imagine going through your life with ideological congruity being the most important thing for your friends, especially political congruity? Like, oh, you know, these people have to believe this or that. I mean, what a sad life, almost a pathetic life, really. You could never.
Mentioned a little while ago when I sat and talked to Mike, the Christian pastor.
Yeah.
he was talking to me about, how, someday we'll be able to enjoy the luxury of debating whether or not God exists again. Right. In the meantime, we have a more pressing enemy, a common enemy, religion, atheism. Basically, society has this common enemy of this mind virus that's infecting us, this religion.
Yeah. And even worse, it's like Shermer, they wanted to, I don't know if I think they did cancel his debate with Frank Turek, but I'm not sure. But, Shermer's staunchly pro-gay marriage, and Turek is against it. They don't even want people who have different beliefs to have debates, public debates, because they think that they already know the solution to the problem. I think a lot of this stuff too gets down to whether or not how trustful in reason that you are. That's another concept from the American Philosophical Association's Delphi report. Whether or not you think rational moral beliefs are rationally derivable. And if you don't think that they are, then there's here. Think about this. Just since I just mentioned Shermer, he was telling me a story about he went to Auschwitz and he was writing about that. I hope I get the story correct. I hope I don't mess the story up. It's the devils are in the detail. But evidently there was a different lock on one of the gas chambers than the original lock. And a Holocaust denier presented this to him like there's a different lock. He sent him pictures. And so Shermer was there. He saw it and he asked, and it created a big hubbubaloo. Basically, they had to change the door for some reason. So Shermer found that out and emailed him, and they had a correspondence about it, and he corrected that mistaken belief about reality. Now, let's say that you would not have a conversation with this guy, and he goes out there popping on the internet all the shit. Look, the lock's different whatsoever, and then you're not talking to this guy because he's a Nazi. Okay? What do you think it makes the belief that what do you think happens to this belief if nobody counters it?
Get propagated unchallenged.
Exactly. And then when that happens, people are more likely to believe it because there's no counter to it.
I mean, even if you are a Nazi who hates the Holocaust, who has all those bad intentions, if you've got this idea that this door is your key to proving it,
right?
And somebody comes up to you who's not a Holocaust denier and says, no, you're an asshole, it's just a bad door, you're not going to prove it anymore. You don't want to be wrong. So right. even if you want to portray bad information, the fact that the good information is out there will stop you from portraying the bad information.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating to me. I don't know how much more time you have. I got a little distracted with my dog eating a dead bird, but
right.
Yeah, edit that out. What's disturbing to me is that all these bad ideas will just metastasize. There'll be nobody to counter them because a significant number of people have been taught, don't give them a platforming. Don't have a conversation with these people. They're Nazis, they're homophobes, they're bigots, they're racist. Okay, so then not only does that provide cover for people who are actually bigoted or racist, but people's epistemology becomes brittle and they become incapable of dealing with disagreements or disputes, particularly as they enter into, if they have identity level salience, like trans bathrooms or what have you. They become incapable of it. So we've created a generation of people, and Haidt and Lukianoff talk about this in The Coddling of the American Mind. We've created a generation of people right now where they're almost rewarded for being fragile. We've created a victim culture.
Yeah, these are participation trophies on a rise. The modern day version of participation trophies.
Yeah, and yeah. So there you go. I mean, dude, it's a problem. It's a problem. And here's one more thing, a couple other things I have in my mind. So here's another problem. Ruben told me this a few years ago, and it just struck me as true, but I'm completely convinced that it's true now, and I have overwhelming evidence. Have you ever noticed, I don't know if you get this on your Twitter feed or what have you, but you'll say something and all these people will all of a sudden chime in. Lindsay was telling me about this the other day. It is astonishing how many of those are sock puppets.
Mm.
And so what it seems like to you is, oh my God, there's like a flood of people who thinks, you put out something that I think is totally common sense and evidence based, and you get a flood of responses. Lindsay was telling me that that's particularly true with people who tweet about biological sex. And they have people who ostensibly look like biologists who are simply not biologists. It's like 2 or 3 people with multiple accounts. That is also, I wouldn't say it's fake news, but it's a mechanism, it's an enforcement mechanism to punish people who speak out against these ideas. So we haven't talked about that at all, but that's also the social media aspect, and the sock puppets are also another factor that's making these conversations far more difficult.
Oh, it's terrorism. It's making you think that you're going to have some sort of onslaught if you don't back off.
Yeah, and then imagine the people like me and you who just don't back off.
No.
Well, why should I back off?
Well,
I'm here. I'll change my mind, but I won't back off.
That's why it's important for people who have less to lose.
Yeah, present your argument, and I'll listen to it.
Yeah.
Maybe, unless your argument consists of, fuck you, Nazi.
Well, and that brings it back to my Twitter feed. Engage them, trying to ask them, hey, let's talk about it. You think I'm an asshole? Let's talk about it. And they run away, and that's what they will continue to do.
Yep.
It's a fucking world.
That's it. So.
It's a scary fucking world, Pete.
Yeah, you should check out, for anybody listening, you should check out, if you want to learn more about the ideology and form this, you should check out New Discourses. There's an unbelievable encyclopedia on, I think it's newdiscourses.com, that Lindsay's put together. I mean, it's epic. And in that, it's literally every conception you can think of in social justice ideology and how that manifests and plays out. And then he gives a right from the horse's mouth. He's not making anything up. It's like, this person believes it. Here it is in the literature. And then he gives a little commentary on each piece. And it's unbelievably insightful. It's just remarkably insightful to help us understand the architecture in place and why these folks think the way they do. Because remember, there are entire wings of university architecture that just promote this nonsense. So anyway, there you go, Dave.
Thank you so much, Pete. Hey, you know what? Tell the family I said hi.
Will do.
And, chin up, brother. I mean, what?
Yeah, well, we'll see. I have a few more big projects in the work that I'm working on. I tell you.
Get in touch with you. How can people get in touch with you? Buy the book, How to Have Impossible Conversations. You read the audiobook, which I also listened to, which is great.
Cool. Thank you.
And any other way to reach you? Do you have a Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Peter Boghossian, at PeterBoghossian. All right, and I appreciate the conversation, man.
And I appreciate yours and your time. Thank you, brother. We'll see you soon.
Right on, man.
All right, bye. Nobody knows that while he's gone, we secretly replaced his coffee with Folgers decaffeinated crystals. Let's see if he finds out. We could all talk about him, like, behind his back. He and I have been friends for a long time. He's the first guy who told me about the idea that wokeism is a religion. And I don't get it first, but now I do. Hey, brother.
All right, sorry about that.
We've been talking about you.
She got into some bad things.
Oh, let me see her. How old is she?
Here we go.
Sweet.
Yeah, she's a doll. We got her the day we got her. Real quick, interrupt the day. Sorry about that. Oh no. She got into the bird again. Sorry. She got into. So the day we got her from. This is what happens when I have no office. My kids are home from college. I have another, because of the pandemic, I have a Chinese woman.
I'm drinking wine at 1:30 in the afternoon. So we're okay.
And now my puppy is chewing on a bird. Okay. Anyway, I'm so sorry. The distractions here are intense. Anyway.
So idea laundering. And you were talking about how money laundering works.
Yeah. Okay. So I have an idea. I said, come here. All right, come here. Stop, drop it. Drop it, drop it, drop it, drop it. She's eating a bird. Drop it. Sorry. Sorry. All right. This is the pandemic problem. I'm so sorry.
Pandemic, brother. Every single one of our watchers right now is giving us a whole bunch of slack because we're all at home and we've been here for a while, and you know.
Right.
So just
I don't want to waste. I don't want to
it's
waste anybody's
such an
time.
important
So
idea. I'm really frothing to get this idea out to my listeners.
okay. So maybe we could. Let's just edit that whole scene out, and we'll go back.
I'm going to bring it out because it's funny. Maybe I'll put it on the outtakes.
Yeah.
I'll do
Put it on the outtakes, and she's still eating the bird.